Chapter 1. A Log Cabin Beginning. Abraham Lincoln was born on a cold winter day, February 12, 1809. The place? A tiny log cabin in the woods of Kentucky. The cabin was small, just one room. No fancy furniture, no warm carpet, and no glass windows. Only rough wood and the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks. Life was simple and hard. Abraham's parents, Thomas and Nancy Lincoln, were poor. They worked with their hands, farming the land and raising animals. Every day was a struggle to survive. Food was plain: corn, beans, and sometimes a little meat. Fancy meals? Forget it. Shoes? Rarely. Warm clothes? Only if they made them themselves. Winter was cold, summer was hot, and every day brought new challenges. But even though they didn't have much, the Lincoln family had something important: love. Nancy Lincoln was kind and gentle. She believed in teaching her children to be honest and good. Thomas Lincoln was strong and hard-working. He believed in never giving up. Together, they taught young Abraham the values that would shape his life. From a young age, Abraham, or Abe, as everyone called him, was different. He was tall for his age, skinny, and strong. But what made him special wasn't just his height or strength. It was his curiosity. Abe wanted to know everything. He asked questions. Why is the sky blue? How do trees grow? What's beyond the forest? His mind was always busy. And then there were the books. Oh, how Abe loved books. But there was a problem. His family didn't have any. Books were expensive, and the nearest school was miles away. Still, Abe didn't give up. Whenever he heard about a book, he would do anything to borrow it. He would walk for miles, barefoot in the dirt, just to hold a book in his hands. At night, after a long day of work, Abe would sit by the fire. The flames flickered and danced, casting shadows on the cabin walls. With a piece of coal, he scribbled letters and numbers on wood or on the dirt floor. He practiced again and again, teaching himself to read and write. Knowledge, Abe said, is power. But life in the forest wasn't just about reading and dreaming. Abe had to work hard. He chopped wood for hours, helped his father build fences, and carried water from the creek. His hands were rough, his muscles strong. He didn't complain, though. He knew his family needed him. Yet, while his hands worked, his mind wandered. What kind of world lay beyond these woods? What could he become? When Abe was just 9 years old, tragedy struck. His mother, Nancy Lincoln, became very sick. There were no doctors nearby, no medicine to help her. One day she passed away. Abe was heartbroken. He felt a deep, aching sadness. She had been his guide, his protector, his source of comfort. How could life go on without her? But Abe learned something important from his mother's death. Life could be unfair. Life could be painful. Yet, even in sadness, there was hope. His stepmother, Sarah Bush Johnston, came into his life not long after. Sarah was kind and warm. She encouraged Abe to keep reading, to keep asking questions, and to keep dreaming. Abe, she said, you're meant for something great. The forest was Abe's playground and his school. He watched animals move through the trees. He listened to the sounds of nature, the rustling leaves, the singing birds, the howl of the wind. He learned to track deer and catch fish, to build fires and navigate the land. Nature taught him patience, observation, and respect. Still, Abe couldn't ignore his hunger for learning. One day, he found an old copy of Aesop's Fables. The book was filled with stories about animals and the lessons they taught. Abe read every word again and again. Each story sparked his imagination. He realized that words had power. They could teach, inspire, and change minds. As Abe grew older, he began to notice the world around him. He saw people struggling. He saw injustice. He saw that not everyone had the same opportunities. These thoughts stayed with him, whispering in his mind, "What can I do? How can I help?" Abe's childhood wasn't easy, but it shaped him into the man he would become. From his humble beginnings in the log cabin, he learned hard work, resilience, and the value of honesty. From his mother, he learned kindness. From his stepmother, he learned encouragement. And from the books, he learned ideas. Big ideas. By the time he was a teenager, Abe was no longer just the curious boy in the woods. He was becoming a thinker, a dreamer, and a believer in a better future. But he still had a long way to go. The world was waiting. And so was his destiny. Little did anyone know, the boy who sat by the fire reading Aesop's Fables would one day lead a nation through its darkest hours. But for now, he was just Abe, a boy in a log cabin, dreaming of something more. Chapter 2. Learning by Firelight. Abraham Lincoln loved books, but finding them wasn't easy. In the early 1800s, books were rare, especially in the backwoods of Kentucky and Indiana. Most families didn't own any books at all. Abe's family was no different. They were too poor to afford them. Yet Abe didn't let that stop him. He found a way to learn. When Abe was still a boy, his stepmother, Sarah, noticed something special about him. He was different from other children. While many boys spent their free time playing or hunting, Abe wanted to read. He wanted to know. Sarah saw this hunger for knowledge, and she encouraged him. "Abe," she said, "if you want to learn, you'll find a way." Abe did find a way, even when it seemed impossible. He borrowed books from neighbors. Sometimes he walked miles, barefoot, to get a book. The roads were muddy, the paths were rough, and the weather could be harsh. But Abe didn't care. When he held a book in his hands, he felt rich. One of the first books Abe read was the Bible. It wasn't just a book of religion to him. It was full of stories, stories about courage, sacrifice, and hope. These stories lit a fire in his heart. They made him think about right and wrong, about justice, and about the power of words. Abe read other books too. One was Aesop's Fables. He loved the simple stories about animals that taught important lessons. Slow and steady wins the race. Honesty is the best policy. Abe read these fables over and over. He memorized them. He even shared them with others, telling the stories in his own words. But reading wasn't easy for Abe. His family didn't have candles or lamps. At night, the cabin was dark, except for the small fire burning in the hearth. So, Abe used the firelight. He would lie on the floor, his long legs stretched out, and place the book as close to the fire as he could. The flickering flames gave just enough light for him to read. Imagine the scene. The room is quiet. Outside, the wind howls and the trees creak in the night. Inside, the fire crackles softly. Abe leans close, squinting at the tiny letters on the page. His hands are rough from work, but they turn the pages gently. His face glows in the firelight, full of concentration, full of wonder. He read late into the night. Sometimes he was so tired from working all day that his eyes would droop. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Books were his key to a bigger world, a world beyond the forests and fields of Kentucky and Indiana, a world where ideas mattered, a world where he could matter. Abe's passion for learning wasn't just about books. He loved to write, too, but like books, paper was rare. So, Abe used whatever he could find. He wrote on wood, on leaves, even on the dirt floor of the cabin. With a piece of charcoal, he practiced writing letters and words. Over and over, he copied what he read. He wanted to remember everything. Sometimes, Abe shared what he learned with his family. He told his stepmother stories from the books he read. He explained ideas he didn't fully understand yet, trying to make sense of them out loud. His family listened, amazed at how much he knew and how much he wanted to know. One of Abe's favorite books was a biography of George Washington, the first president of the United States. Abe admired Washington's courage and leadership. He read the book so many times that he knew parts of it by heart. Washington's story inspired him. If George Washington could lead a nation, Abe thought, maybe I can do something great too. But Abe's journey wasn't just about books. It was about determination. Learning wasn't easy for him. During the day, he worked hard, chopping wood, plowing fields, building fences. His hands ached, his back hurt, and his muscles were sore. After all that, he still found time to read and write. He was tired, but he didn't give up. And there were challenges. One day, Abe borrowed a book from a neighbor. It was about American history, and he was excited to read it. But that night, as he slept, rain leaked through the cabin's roof. The book was soaked. Abe was horrified. He had ruined the book. He could have hidden it or pretended it didn't happen. But that wasn't who Abe was. Instead, he walked to the neighbor's house and explained what happened. "I'm sorry," Abe said. "I'll make it right." The neighbor was upset, but he saw Abe's honesty. He agreed to let Abe work to repay him. For days, Abe harvested corn in the neighbor's fields to pay for the damaged book. It was hard work, but Abe didn't complain. He had learned an important lesson. Responsibility matters. The more Abe read, the more his mind grew. He started thinking about the world in new ways. He asked questions. Why are some people treated better than others? Why is life so unfair for some? Can one person make a difference? These questions stayed with him, shaping his thoughts, his dreams, and his future. But for now, Abe was still a boy. A boy lying on the floor by the fire, dreaming of a bigger world. He didn't know where his journey would take him. He didn't know that one day his words would change history. But in his heart, he believed in the power of learning. Years later, people would call Abraham Lincoln a great man. They would admire his speeches, his leadership, and his wisdom. But those great things began here, by the firelight in a small cabin, with a boy who refused to give up. Chapter 3. Honest Abe's First Jobs. As Abraham Lincoln grew older, he became tall, very tall. By the time he was a young man, he was nearly 6 feet 4 inches, a giant in his time. He had long arms, strong muscles, and a kind face. People often noticed his height, but there was something else about Abe that made him stand out. His honesty. In those days, life was hard for everyone. There weren't big cities or fancy machines to make work easier. People had to survive with their hands, their tools, and their strength. Abe's family moved to Indiana and later to Illinois, looking for better land and more opportunities. Wherever they went, Abe worked hard to help them. One of Abe's first jobs was splitting logs. He would take a heavy axe and chop trees into pieces of wood for fences. Back then, farmers needed strong fences to keep their animals safe and their crops protected. Abe became known for his skill. He could split logs quickly and cleanly, leaving perfect pieces of wood. People even gave him a nickname, the Rail Splitter. It was tough work. The sun burned his skin, and his hands were covered in blisters. The axe was heavy, and the days were long. But Abe didn't complain. He worked hard, swinging the axe again and again. Every swing taught him something about effort, persistence, and patience. But Abe wasn't just strong. He was also thoughtful. While working, he would often stop to talk to people. He told funny stories and made everyone laugh. His laughter was loud and warm. It made people feel good. But more than his jokes, people loved Abe's honesty. They could trust him. If he said he would do something, he did it. If he borrowed something, he returned it. No matter what, Abe always told the truth. One story about Abe's honesty became famous. When he was a young man, he worked at a small store. The store sold everything: food, tools, clothes, and more. Abe enjoyed working there because it gave him a chance to meet people. He would greet each customer with a smile and ask how they were doing. One day, a woman came into the store to buy some sugar. Abe measured the sugar carefully, wrapped it up, and gave it to her. She paid and left. But later, Abe realized he had made a mistake. He had charged her a few cents too much. Now, a few cents wasn't a lot of money, but to Abe, it mattered. He didn't want to cheat anyone, not even by accident. So, what did he do? He walked several miles, yes, miles, to the woman's house to return the money. She was surprised and touched. "Thank you, Abe," she said. "You're an honest man." From then on, people started calling him Honest Abe. But Abe's time at the store wasn't just about selling sugar or measuring flour. It was also about learning. He listened to people talk about their lives, their hopes, and their problems. He read every newspaper he could find, learning about the world beyond the little town. He even kept a notebook in his pocket to write down ideas or new words he learned. Another job Abe had was working on a flatboat. Flatboats were big, wooden rafts used to carry goods like corn, tobacco, and cotton down the rivers. Abe helped load the boats, steer them, and deliver the goods to different towns. The trips weren't easy. The rivers were dangerous, with strong currents and sudden storms. Sometimes thieves tried to steal the goods. But Abe stayed calm. He used his strength to handle the boat and his quick thinking to solve problems. One of these trips took him all the way to New Orleans. It was a big city, much bigger than anything Abe had seen before. There were markets full of colorful fruits, spices, and goods from around the world. The streets were loud and busy, filled with people speaking different languages. But not everything in New Orleans was exciting or good. While in the city, Abe saw enslaved people being sold at an auction. Men, women, and children were treated as property, not as human beings. Abe was horrified. He couldn't forget the sight of families being torn apart and people being treated so cruelly. This moment stayed with him for the rest of his life. He began to think, how can this be right? How can one person own another? After his trip to New Orleans, Abe returned to Illinois with new ideas and questions in his mind, but he still needed to earn a living. So he took another job, helping to run a post office. As a postmaster, Abe delivered letters and packages to people in the area. He loved the job because it connected him to the community. Everyone knew Abe, and everyone trusted him. One day, Abe found an old book in the post office. It was about law and government. He opened the book and started reading. The words were difficult, and the ideas were complex. But Abe was curious. He read slowly, underlining important passages and writing notes in the margins. The book sparked something in him. He started to dream of becoming a lawyer. But how could a poor, uneducated boy from the frontier become a lawyer? Abe's jobs taught him more than just how to work. They taught him about people, responsibility, and the value of trust. Whether he was splitting logs, running a store, or delivering mail, Abe always did his best. He believed in fairness, kindness, and honesty. These lessons would guide him for the rest of his life. By now, Abe was no longer just the boy who lay by the firelight reading books. He was becoming a man with big dreams and a strong sense of right and wrong. People admired him for his hard work, his honesty, and his big heart. But Abe was still searching for his purpose. Little did he know, his first jobs were only the beginning of his journey. The lessons he learned as Honest Abe would prepare him for challenges far greater than anything he had faced before. The world was waiting for him, and so was history. Chapter 4. The Power of Words. Abraham Lincoln loved to read. Books opened up the world to him, showing him ideas, places, and stories far beyond the forests of Indiana and Illinois. But as much as he loved reading, he loved speaking even more. Abe had a gift, a way with words. Whether he was telling a funny story or debating an important idea, people couldn't help but listen. As a young man, Abe became known for his storytelling. He could take an ordinary moment and turn it into something unforgettable. Sitting by the fire or standing in a field, Abe would gather a small crowd. His voice was steady, his eyes sparkled, and his smile invited everyone to stay and listen. Sometimes he told jokes that made people laugh so hard they wiped tears from their eyes. Other times, he shared stories with deep lessons that made them think. One of Abe's favorite stories to tell was about a farmer and his stubborn horse. The horse refused to move, no matter what the farmer did. Abe would stretch out the tale, adding funny details, until everyone was leaning forward, waiting to hear how the story would end. Then, with perfect timing, he delivered the punchline. Laughter would fill the air. Abe's humor brought people together. It made them feel connected. But Abe's love for words wasn't just about making people laugh. He also loved to debate. In those days, debating was a popular activity. People would gather to hear others discuss big ideas, like how the government should work or what laws were fair. Abe enjoyed stepping into these debates. He didn't have formal education or fancy words, but he had something even more powerful: clear thinking and common sense. When Abe debated, he used stories and examples to make his points. If someone argued for one idea, Abe would listen carefully. Then he would reply with a story or a question that made everyone stop and think. He had a way of breaking down complicated topics so that anyone could understand. And when he spoke, people believed him because he spoke from the heart. One day, Abe attended a meeting in New Salem, Illinois, where he had recently moved. The town was small, and most of the people didn't know him yet. During the meeting, a disagreement broke out. People argued loudly about what to do next. Abe listened quietly for a while. Then he stood up and spoke. His words were simple but powerful. He used humor to calm the tension and reason to solve the problem. By the time he finished, the crowd was silent. Then they began to cheer. Who was this tall, thin man who spoke with such honesty and wisdom? They didn't know yet, but they would soon. After that day, people began inviting Abe to speak at other meetings. He quickly became a favorite in New Salem. People admired not only his clever arguments, but also his character. He didn't speak to show off or prove he was smarter than others. He spoke because he cared. Whether it was about farming, business, or government, Abe wanted to find the truth and help others see it too. As Abe's reputation grew, so did his confidence. He started thinking about his future. Could he do more with his talent for words? Could he use his voice to help his community, his state, or even his country? These questions led him to a big decision. He would run for office. In 1832, Abe decided to run for the Illinois state legislature. It was a bold move. He was only 23 years old, and he had very little formal education. Many of his opponents were older, wealthier, and better known. But Abe didn't let that stop him. He believed in himself and in the power of his words. During his campaign, Abe traveled around the district, meeting people and giving speeches. He didn't have money for fancy posters or ads. Instead, he relied on his honesty, his humor, and his ability to connect with others. He talked about things that mattered to ordinary people: better roads, fair taxes, and opportunities for everyone. At every stop, people listened. They liked the way Abe spoke plainly, without big, confusing words. They liked the way he shared stories to explain his ideas. And most of all, they liked the way he respected them. Abe treated everyone the same, whether they were rich or poor, educated or not. He believed every person deserved a chance to succeed. But Abe's first campaign didn't go as planned. When the votes were counted, he lost. It was disappointing, of course. He had worked so hard. But Abe didn't give up. He saw the loss as a lesson, not a failure. He realized he needed to learn more about politics, about laws, and about how to make a real difference. So, Abe threw himself into studying. He read books about law and government, often late into the night. He practiced his speaking skills, refining the way he explained ideas. And he continued debating and telling stories, earning even more respect from the people around him. 2 years later, in 1834, Abe ran for the Illinois state legislature again. This time, he won. It was the beginning of his political career, a career that would take him far beyond the small towns of Illinois. But even as Abe rose in politics, he never forgot the power of words. He knew words could inspire people, bring them together, and change the world. He also knew words came with responsibility. He chose his words carefully, always aiming to be honest and fair. As Abe stood in front of the state legislature for the first time, he must have felt a mix of pride and humility. Here he was, a poor boy from a log cabin, now helping to make laws for the state of Illinois. It was proof that hard work and honesty could open doors, and that the power of words could lead to great things. Little did Abe know this was just the beginning. His words would carry him even further, to debates, to national politics, and to the most challenging moments in American history. But for now, he was simply Abe, a storyteller, a debater, and a young politician with big dreams. Chapter 5. The Path to the Presidency. Abraham Lincoln had big ideas about fairness, freedom, and a united country, but not everyone agreed with him. In fact, many people didn't. He faced failure after failure, rejection after rejection. Yet, he never gave up. And in 1860, he made the boldest decision of his life. He ran for president. What happened next would change history forever. After years of working as a lawyer and serving in the Illinois state legislature, Abe's name was becoming more well-known. He was admired for his honesty, his simple way of speaking, and his ability to connect with people. But what truly set him apart was his belief in something bigger. A belief in what America could become. At that time, the United States was in trouble. The country was deeply divided. People in the North and South couldn't agree on one major issue: slavery. The South depended on enslaved people to work on their farms and plantations. The North, however, believed that slavery was wrong and should end. The arguments grew louder and angrier, and the nation seemed ready to break apart. Abe couldn't stay silent. He believed slavery was unfair, unjust, and against the very idea of freedom. He spoke out against it in powerful speeches. One of his most famous speeches was given in 1858 when he said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." He meant that the United States couldn't survive if it stayed divided over slavery. The country had to choose freedom for all or slavery for some. Not everyone liked Abe's message. In fact, many people in the South hated it. Even some people in the North thought he was going too far. But Abe didn't back down. He believed in speaking the truth, even when it wasn't popular. He believed in fighting for what was right. By 1860, Abe had become a leader in the Republican Party, a new political group that opposed slavery. The party needed a strong candidate for the presidential election. They wanted someone who could unite the North, someone people could trust. That someone was Abraham Lincoln. When the Republican Party chose Abe as their candidate, he was surprised. "Me? Run for president?" he thought. But the more he considered it, the more he realized it was his chance to make a difference. So, he accepted the challenge. Abe's campaign wasn't fancy. He didn't have the money to travel across the country giving speeches. Instead, his supporters spread his ideas through newspapers, posters, and word of mouth. They talked about Abe's humble beginnings, how he had grown up poor in a log cabin, worked hard, and taught himself to read and write. They called him Honest Abe, a name that made people trust him. The election wasn't easy. Abe had 3 opponents, and the country was more divided than ever. Many people in the South didn't even put Abe's name on the ballot. They refused to consider someone who opposed slavery. But Abe's supporters in the North believed in him. They believed he could lead the country through its troubles. On Election Day, November 6th, 1860, people across the country cast their votes. The wait was long and tense. Finally, the results came in. Abraham Lincoln had won. He was now the 16th President of the United States. Abe's victory brought hope to many people, especially those who believed in freedom and equality. But it also brought fear and anger to others. Southern states felt threatened. They believed Abe would try to end slavery, taking away their way of life. Just weeks after the election, some southern states decided to leave the Union. They formed their own government called the Confederacy. Abe hadn't even taken office yet, and already the country was falling apart. The task ahead of him seemed impossible. How could one man keep the nation together? How could he end slavery without causing more division? The challenges were enormous. But Abe was ready. On March 4th, 1861, Abraham Lincoln stood in front of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. to give his first speech as president. The day was cold, and the crowd was quiet. Everyone wanted to hear what Abe would say. Would he threaten the South? Would he promise war? Instead, Abe spoke of unity. He told the crowd that he didn't want to fight. He wanted peace. "We are not enemies, but friends," he said. "We must not be enemies." His words were calm, thoughtful, and full of hope. But even as he spoke, he knew the road ahead would be difficult. In April 1861, just 1 month after Abe became president, the first shots of the Civil War were fired. The conflict between the North and South had begun. Abe's journey to the presidency was over, but his journey as a leader had just begun. Looking back, it's amazing to think about how far Abe had come. From a tiny log cabin in Kentucky to the White House in Washington, D.C., his life was a testament to the power of hard work, honesty, and determination. But Abe didn't become president for himself. He became president because he believed in something greater, a united nation, a nation where freedom and equality could thrive. Abe's story teaches us an important lesson. Failure is not the end. Before he became president, Abe lost elections, faced criticism, and struggled to make a name for himself. But he never gave up. He kept learning, kept speaking, and kept believing in his dreams. And in the end, his persistence changed the course of history. The election of 1860 wasn't just about one man winning an office. It was about a turning point in America's story. It was about the fight for freedom, the fight to keep the nation whole. And at the center of it all was Abraham Lincoln, a man with big ideas and an even bigger heart. Before we begin Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on Woo English. Remember, this content is specially made for Woo English listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of Woo English's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6. The Nation Divided. Abraham Lincoln became president on March 4th, 1861. It was a cold, windy day in Washington, D.C. He stood tall and serious as he gave his first speech as president. His voice was steady, but his heart was heavy. The country was in chaos, and everyone knew it. For years, the North and South had been arguing about power, about states' rights, and especially about slavery. The South wanted to keep slavery because it was part of their economy. The North, however, wanted to stop the spread of slavery. These arguments had grown worse and worse until the country was deeply divided. Families argued. Neighbors became enemies. The United States no longer felt united. Just weeks before Lincoln became president, 7 Southern states left the Union. They said, "We are no longer part of the United States." They formed their own government called the Confederacy, with Jefferson Davis as their president. This act shocked the nation. More states soon followed. Suddenly, it seemed as if the United States was breaking apart. Lincoln did not want war. He believed the Union, the group of all the states, should stay together. He called it the last best hope of Earth. He didn't want to fight the South, but he couldn't let them leave either. He wanted to find a peaceful solution. In his inaugural speech, he said, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies." But his words weren't enough to stop what was coming. In April 1861, just 1 month after Lincoln became president, the first shots of the Civil War were fired. It happened at Fort Sumter, a military fort in South Carolina. The Confederate Army attacked the fort, and after a long fight, the Union soldiers surrendered. War had begun. The news spread quickly. People in the North and South prepared for battle. Young men volunteered to fight, believing the war would be short. But Lincoln knew better. He knew this would be a long, bloody struggle. The North had more people, factories, and railroads, but the South had skilled generals and a strong will to defend their land. Lincoln faced an enormous challenge. How could he lead the country through a war when it was already so divided? He had to make difficult decisions, decisions that could mean life or death for thousands of people. But he stayed calm and focused. He believed in the Union, and he believed in freedom. As the war continued, Lincoln faced criticism from all sides. People in the North said he wasn't doing enough to win the war. People in the South said he was trying to destroy their way of life. Even some of his own advisors questioned his choices. But Lincoln didn't let the criticism stop him. He listened carefully, thought deeply, and made decisions based on what he believed was right. One of Lincoln's biggest challenges was finding the right generals to lead the Union Army. At first, many of his generals were too cautious, too slow. The Confederate Army, led by General Robert E. Lee, won several important battles. The Union Army struggled, and Lincoln grew frustrated. He needed someone bold, someone who could lead the Union to victory. Finally, he found that person, General Ulysses S. Grant. While the battles raged on, Lincoln faced another challenge, keeping the border states in the Union. These were states like Kentucky, Missouri, and Maryland that allowed slavery but hadn't joined the Confederacy. Lincoln had to be careful. If he pushed too hard against slavery, these states might join the South. But if he didn't act, slavery would continue. It was a delicate balance, and Lincoln worked tirelessly to maintain it. Despite the chaos and violence of the war, Lincoln stayed true to his beliefs. He saw the Civil War as more than just a fight to keep the country together. To him, it was a fight for freedom and equality. He believed slavery was wrong, morally, legally, and politically. He wanted to end it, but he knew he had to wait for the right moment. That moment came on January 1st, 1863. Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation declaring that all enslaved people in the Confederate States were free. The proclamation didn't immediately free every enslaved person, but it changed the focus of the war. Now, the war wasn't just about keeping the Union together. It was about freedom. It was about justice. Lincoln's bold action inspired millions, including African Americans who joined the Union Army to fight for their freedom. But the war was far from over. The battles were brutal. Thousands of soldiers died, and many more were wounded. Cities and farms were destroyed. Families were torn apart. Lincoln visited soldiers in hospitals, spoke at funerals, and wrote letters to grieving families. Each loss weighed heavily on him. He once said, "I have been driven many times to my knees by the overwhelming conviction that I had nowhere else to go." One of the most devastating battles was the Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863. It was a turning point in the war, with the Union Army defeating the Confederates after 3 days of fierce fighting. But the cost was high. Over 50,000 soldiers were killed or wounded. Lincoln was deeply moved by the sacrifice of these soldiers. Later that year, Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg to dedicate a cemetery for the fallen soldiers. There, he gave a short but powerful speech known as the Gettysburg Address. In just 272 words, he reminded the nation of its founding principles: freedom, equality, and democracy. "This nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom," he said, "and government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." His words echoed across the land, giving hope to a weary nation. Through it all, Lincoln remained focused on his goal: preserving the Union. He faced incredible pressure, personal loss, and countless sleepless nights. Yet, he never lost sight of what was at stake. To him, the United States was more than just a country. It was an idea, a place where freedom and opportunity could thrive. As the war dragged on, Lincoln began to see a glimmer of hope. The Union Army, now under General Grant, started winning more battles. The Confederate Army was running out of supplies and soldiers. Victory was within reach, but the cost had been terrible. Hundreds of thousands of lives had been lost, and the nation was forever changed. The Civil War was the darkest chapter in American history, but Lincoln believed it was necessary to save the Union and end slavery. He once said, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. We must think anew and act anew." Lincoln's leadership during this time showed his strength, his compassion, and his unwavering belief in justice. The country was divided, but his steady hand guided it through the storm. He didn't know it yet, but the end of the war and his greatest challenge was just around the corner. Chapter 7: The Emancipation Proclamation. Slavery was wrong. Abraham Lincoln knew this deep in his heart. He had always believed that no person should own another. For years, he spoke out against slavery, but he also knew that ending it wouldn't be easy. The country was divided. The Civil War had already begun. But in 1863, Lincoln made a bold move. one that would change history forever. When Lincoln became president, he knew slavery was the biggest problem facing the nation. In the southern states, slavery was part of everyday life. It was how many farms and plantations made their money. But in the North, people believed slavery was wrong and wanted it to stop. The arguments over slavery had grown so big that they helped start the Civil War. At first, Lincoln's main goal as president was to keep the Union together. He wanted to stop the southern states from leaving and bring the country back as one. But as the war continued, Lincoln began to see that the fight wasn't just about saving the Union. It was also about freedom. If the United States was going to survive, slavery had to end. Still, Lincoln had to be careful. Many states in the North, called the border states, still allowed slavery. These states hadn't joined the Confederacy, but they might if Lincoln acted too quickly. He needed to wait for the right moment. That moment came in 1862. The war was not going well for the Union. The Confederate Army was strong, and the Union needed a way to turn the tide. Lincoln realized that freeing enslaved people in the South could help. It would weaken the Confederacy by taking away their labor force. It would also send a powerful message: the war was now a fight for freedom. In September 1862, after the Union won a major battle at Antietam, Lincoln made an announcement. He said that if the southern states didn't rejoin the Union by January 1st, 1863, he would free all enslaved people in those states. It was a warning, but Lincoln knew the South wouldn't listen. So, on January 1st, 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. With the stroke of a pen, he declared that all enslaved people in the Confederate States were free. It was a historic moment, a moment of courage and hope. Lincoln's words in the proclamation were powerful. All persons held as slaves within any state, in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. The message was clear. Freedom was no longer just a dream. It was now the law. But the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free all enslaved people. It only applied to the Confederate States, not the border states. Even so, it was a turning point. For millions of enslaved people, it gave them something they hadn't had before. Hope. Hope that their chains would one day be broken. Hope that they could live as free men and women. The proclamation also had a big impact on the war. Thousands of African Americans joined the Union Army to fight for their freedom. They became soldiers, cooks, nurses, and spies. They risked their lives to help the Union win. Their bravery inspired others and gave new strength to the fight for freedom. But Lincoln's decision wasn't popular with everyone. Many people in the North didn't agree with the proclamation. They thought Lincoln was going too far. Some believed the war was only about saving the Union, not about ending slavery. In the South, the Confederacy was furious. They said Lincoln had no right to free their slaves. The proclamation made the war even more intense. Lincoln knew his decision was risky. He once said, If my name ever goes into history, it will be for this act, and my whole soul is in it. He was willing to take the risk because he believed it was the right thing to do. For Lincoln, freedom wasn't just a political goal. It was a moral duty. As the war continued, the Emancipation Proclamation became a symbol of hope and change. It inspired abolitionists, people who wanted to end slavery, to keep fighting for justice. It also showed the world that the United States was serious about freedom. Countries like Britain and France, which had considered supporting the Confederacy, now stayed out of the war. The proclamation was just the beginning. Lincoln knew that to truly end slavery, the country needed a new law. So, he pushed for the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which would make slavery illegal in every state. The amendment was passed in 1865, just months before the war ended. It was the final step in abolishing slavery in the United States. The Emancipation Proclamation was one of Lincoln's greatest achievements. It showed his courage, his vision, and his belief in equality. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start, a step toward a better, freer future. For millions of enslaved people, Lincoln's words were more than just ink on paper. They were a promise that their lives mattered, a promise that freedom was possible, a promise that the United States could live up to its ideals of liberty and justice for all. Looking back, it's clear that the Emancipation Proclamation was a turning point, not just in the Civil War, but in American history. It changed the meaning of the war. It changed the nation's path, and it changed the lives of millions. Lincoln once said, "Whenever I hear anyone arguing for slavery, I feel a strong impulse to see it tried on him personally." He believed in fairness and justice, and he fought for those ideals until the very end. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't end the war, but it gave the Union a new purpose. It gave enslaved people hope, and it showed the world that Abraham Lincoln was not just a president. He was a leader who believed in the power of freedom. Chapter 8. Leading Through the Storm. The Civil War raged on, year after year. It brought sadness, fear, and loss to every corner of the country. Families were torn apart. Towns became battlefields. Thousands of soldiers fought and died on both sides. And in the middle of it all was Abraham Lincoln, trying to hold the nation together. Being president during the Civil War was not easy. Every day, Lincoln faced difficult choices. He had to decide how to lead the Union Army, what laws to pass, and how to bring the country back together. His decisions carried great weight. If he made a mistake, it could cost lives, or even the future of the United States. Lincoln spent many sleepless nights thinking, planning, and worrying. He often walked alone in the halls of the White House, deep in thought. His face grew tired, and his eyes looked sad. The war was taking a toll on him, but he never gave up. He believed the Union must be saved, no matter how hard it was. The battles were brutal. Each one brought news of more lives lost. Lincoln felt every loss deeply. He wrote letters to the families of fallen soldiers, offering words of comfort. In one letter, he said, "I cannot imagine how deeply you must feel, but please know that your son's sacrifice has helped save the nation." One of the hardest parts of Lincoln's job was choosing generals to lead the Union Army. At first, many of his generals were too cautious. They didn't take risks, and the Confederate Army won battle after battle. Lincoln grew frustrated. He needed a leader who could fight boldly and win. After much searching, he found that leader, General Ulysses S. Grant. Grant was tough, determined, and unafraid to make bold moves. Under his command, the Union Army began to win important battles. Lincoln trusted Grant and gave him full control of the army. Together, they worked tirelessly to bring the war to an end. But Lincoln's leadership wasn't just about battles. He also had to manage the divided opinions of the people. Some Northerners wanted peace, even if it meant letting the South leave the Union. Others thought Lincoln wasn't doing enough to win the war. In the South, people hated Lincoln, blaming him for their suffering. No matter what he did, someone was unhappy. Lincoln tried to focus on the bigger picture. He reminded people that the war wasn't just about keeping the Union together. It was also about ending slavery and building a fairer nation. In 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared enslaved people in the South free. This bold act gave the Union a new purpose and inspired many to keep fighting. Lincoln also worked hard to pass the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which would make slavery illegal everywhere in the United States. He believed that ending slavery was not only right, but necessary for the country's future. He told Congress, "If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong." Passing the amendment was a long and difficult process, but Lincoln fought for it with all his strength. As the war dragged on, Lincoln faced personal struggles too. His son, Willie, whom he loved dearly, died of an illness in 1862. Lincoln and his wife, Mary, were heartbroken. The loss brought them closer in some ways, but also added to their pain. Mary struggled with grief, and Lincoln had to carry the weight of his family's sadness while leading the nation. Despite the darkness of the war, there were moments of hope. One of those moments came after the Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863. This battle was one of the bloodiest of the war, but it was also a turning point. The Union Army defeated the Confederates, giving the North a much-needed victory. Later that year, Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg to dedicate a cemetery for the soldiers who had died there. He gave a short but powerful speech known as the Gettysburg Address. In just a few minutes, Lincoln reminded the nation of its founding principles: freedom, equality, and democracy. His words inspired millions. This nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Lincoln's ability to inspire was one of his greatest strengths. Even in the darkest times, he found the right words to give people hope. He believed in the power of unity and the importance of staying true to American ideals. But as the war neared its end, the challenges didn't stop. The Confederate Army was losing, but they refused to surrender. Cities were destroyed, families were starving, and soldiers were exhausted. Lincoln knew the country would need to heal once the fighting was over. How could he bring the North and South back together after so much pain and anger? Lincoln had a plan. He called it malice toward none and charity for all. This meant forgiving the South and helping them rebuild rather than punishing them for the war. He wanted to reunite the country with kindness, not hatred. "We are not enemies, but friends," he said. "We must not be enemies." Finally, in April 1865, the war came to an end. General Robert E. Lee, the leader of the Confederate Army, surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The Union had won. The fighting was over, and the nation was saved. Lincoln felt a mix of relief and sadness. The war had cost so many lives. The country was deeply scarred. But there was also hope. Hope for a new beginning, a chance to build a better, freer nation. Leading through the storm of the Civil War had been the greatest challenge of Lincoln's life. He had faced criticism, heartbreak, and countless sleepless nights. But through it all, he stayed focused on his vision of a united America. As Lincoln looked out at the war-torn nation, he knew his work wasn't finished. There was still so much to do to heal the country and bring people together. Little did he know, his time was running out. But his leadership during the storm of the Civil War would leave a legacy that would inspire generations to come. Chapter 9. Gettysburg. Words for the Ages. The year was 1863. The Civil War had already raged for more than 2 years, and the country was torn apart. Families were grieving, cities were destroyed, and the future of the United States was uncertain. But in July of that year, something happened that changed the course of the war. The Battle of Gettysburg. Gettysburg was a small town in Pennsylvania. It wasn't famous before the battle, but that changed quickly. For 3 days, the Union and Confederate armies fought there in one of the bloodiest battles of the war. Cannons roared. Guns fired. Soldiers charged into danger. By the time the fighting ended, over 50,000 men were dead, wounded, or missing. It was a tragic and costly victory for the Union, but it also became a turning point in the war. The people of Gettysburg were left with a terrible scene. Fields were covered with broken cannons, abandoned weapons, and the bodies of fallen soldiers. Families came to bury their loved ones. Others came to help the wounded. The town, once quiet and peaceful, was now filled with sadness and loss. Amid this sorrow, the leaders of the Union decided to honor the soldiers who had fought and died there. They planned to dedicate a cemetery for the fallen, a place where their sacrifice would be remembered forever. For this ceremony, they invited President Abraham Lincoln to speak. Lincoln was not the main speaker that day. The organizers chose a famous orator, Edward Everett, to give the main address. Everett was known for his long and elegant speeches, and he spoke for over 2 hours. The crowd listened politely, but many were tired and restless by the end. Then it was Lincoln's turn. Lincoln stood up, tall and serious. He didn't bring a long speech with him, just a small piece of paper. He had written his speech the night before, thinking carefully about each word. He knew he didn't need to speak for hours. He needed to speak from the heart. He began with words that still echo through history. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. A score means 20 years, so 77 means 87 years. Lincoln was talking about 1776, the year the United States declared its independence. He reminded the audience that the country was founded on the idea of equality and freedom. But now, those ideals were in danger. Lincoln's speech was short, only about 2 minutes long, but every word carried meaning. He spoke about the bravery of the soldiers who fought at Gettysburg. He honored their sacrifice, saying, "The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here." Then Lincoln looked to the future. He said the war was a test of whether the nation could survive. He called on the people to keep fighting for the ideals of liberty and democracy. His final words were a powerful promise that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. When Lincoln finished, there was a moment of silence. The crowd wasn't sure how to react. His speech was so short, so simple, but so powerful. Slowly, people began to applaud. Some even wept. They realized that they had just heard something extraordinary. Not everyone loved Lincoln's speech at first. Some newspapers criticized it, saying it was too plain or too brief. But as time passed, people began to understand the genius of Lincoln's words. He had captured the pain and hope of the nation in just a few sentences. His speech gave the country something it desperately needed: a sense of purpose. The Gettysburg Address wasn't just a speech about a battle. It was a reminder of what the United States stood for: freedom, equality, and democracy. It was a call to action, urging people to honor the sacrifices of the soldiers by continuing the fight for a better future. For Lincoln, the speech was deeply personal. He felt the weight of the war every day. He knew the sacrifices of the soldiers weren't just numbers, they were lives. Husbands, fathers, brothers, and sons. He wanted their deaths to mean something. He wanted to ensure that their fight would lead to a stronger, freer nation. The Gettysburg Address became one of the most famous speeches in American history. Today, it is studied in schools, recited at ceremonies, and remembered as a masterpiece of leadership and inspiration. Lincoln's words continue to inspire people around the world. They remind us of the power of democracy and the importance of standing up for what is right. But for Lincoln, the Gettysburg Address was just one moment in his journey. He still had a long, hard road ahead. The war was far from over, and the country's wounds were deep. Yet, even in the darkest times, Lincoln's words lit a path forward. As he left Gettysburg that day, Lincoln didn't know how his speech would be remembered. He only knew that he had spoken from his heart. He had honored the fallen soldiers and called on the living to finish the work they had begun. And in doing so, he gave the nation something priceless: hope. Chapter 10. Victory and Loss. The Civil War finally ended in April 1865. After 4 long years of fighting, the Union had won. General Robert E. Lee, leader of the Confederate Army, surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The war was over. The Union was saved. People across the North celebrated. Bells rang, flags waved, and crowds cheered. They were overjoyed that the country would stay together. But for Abraham Lincoln, the victory felt bittersweet. Yes, the Union had won. Yes, slavery was ending. But the cost had been enormous. So many lives lost. So much pain. So much destruction. More than 600,000 soldiers had died in the war. Families had been torn apart. Towns and cities were left in ruins, especially in the South. Lincoln's heart was heavy with grief. He once said, "I feel like I have been stretched on a rack." The war had taken a toll on him, both as a leader and as a man. Lincoln knew the end of the war was just the beginning of a new challenge: rebuilding the nation. The North and South had been enemies for years. How could they come together again? How could the wounds of war be healed? Lincoln believed it was possible, but it would take patience, understanding, and forgiveness. His plan was simple but bold. He wanted to rebuild the South, not punish it. He believed the country needed to work together to move forward. With malice toward none, with charity for all, he said, "Let us strive to bind up the nation's wounds." Lincoln wanted to help the Southern states rejoin the Union, rebuild their economies, and accept a future without slavery. But not everyone agreed with Lincoln's plan. Some people in the North wanted to punish the South for starting the war. They believed the South should pay for its rebellion. Others thought Lincoln wasn't doing enough to ensure the rights of formerly enslaved people. Even after the Emancipation Proclamation, racism and prejudice remained strong in many parts of the country. The South, meanwhile, was deeply bitter. The war had devastated their land, their cities, and their way of life. Many Southerners resented Lincoln and blamed him for their suffering. They didn't trust his plans for rebuilding the Union, and some were even plotting against him. Lincoln understood these divisions. He knew that healing the nation would take time. But he believed in the American people. He believed they could rise above their anger and fear to create a stronger, fairer country. He wanted to bring people together, not push them further apart. In his second inaugural address, given just weeks before the war ended, Lincoln spoke directly to the divided nation. His words were hopeful but honest. "The war has brought sorrow to every home," he said. "Yet, Let us finish the work we are in. Let us strive for peace." His speech was short but powerful, reminding Americans of the ideals that had brought them together in the first place: freedom, equality, and unity. But even as Lincoln looked to the future, danger was near. Not everyone wanted him to succeed. Among those who opposed him was a man named John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor and a supporter of the Confederacy. Booth blamed Lincoln for the South's defeat and believed he was a threat to America's future. He began to plan a terrible act, an act that would change history forever. On the evening of April 14, 1865, just 5 days after the war ended, Lincoln went to Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. to watch a play called Our American Cousin. It was meant to be a night of relaxation after years of stress and hardship. Lincoln sat in a special box above the stage with his wife, Mary, and 2 friends. But as the play went on, Booth crept into the theater. He climbed the stairs to Lincoln's box, pulled out a gun, and shot the president. Lincoln slumped in his chair, gravely wounded. Chaos erupted in the theater as Booth jumped to the stage and shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," a Latin phrase meaning "thus always to tyrants." Lincoln was carried across the street to a small boarding house where doctors tried to save him. But the wound was too severe. Early the next morning, April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln died. The nation's leader, its symbol of hope and unity, was gone. News of Lincoln's death spread quickly, and the country was plunged into grief. People wept openly in the streets. Flags were lowered to half-staff. Memorial services were held in towns and cities across the nation. Even those who had criticized Lincoln during his presidency mourned his loss. They realized how much he had done to save the Union and end slavery. Lincoln's body was taken on a funeral train from Washington, D.C. to his home in Springfield, Illinois. Along the way, thousands of people gathered to say goodbye. They lined the tracks, waving flags and holding candles. Some knelt in prayer. Others simply stood in silence, their faces full of sorrow. It was clear that Abraham Lincoln had touched the hearts of millions. Though Lincoln was gone, his work lived on. The Union was saved. The 13th Amendment, which ended slavery in the United States, was passed just months after his death. His vision of a united, free nation remained a guiding light for generations to come. But the loss of Lincoln left a deep scar on the nation. Many wondered, could the country heal without him? Could his plan for rebuilding the South succeed? Would America ever truly unite? These questions would take years, decades, to answer. In the end, Lincoln's legacy was not just about his victories. It was about his character. He was a man who faced impossible challenges with courage, kindness, and determination. He believed in the power of honesty, the strength of unity, and the importance of justice. He once said, "The best way to predict your future is to create it." And through his leadership, he helped create a future where freedom and equality could thrive. Victory had come, but at a great cost. Abraham Lincoln paid the ultimate price to save his nation. And though he was gone, his spirit lived on in the hearts of the people. His dream of a better, stronger America would inspire the nation for generations to come. Chapter 11. A Nation Mourns. On April 14, 1865, tragedy struck. Abraham Lincoln, the man who had led the nation through its darkest hour, was gone. The news spread quickly, and the country was plunged into shock and sorrow. People could hardly believe it. Their beloved president, the man who fought for unity and freedom, had been taken from them. That evening, Lincoln had gone to Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., with his wife, Mary, and 2 friends. They were there to watch a play called Our American Cousin. It was meant to be a night of rest and celebration after the long and painful Civil War. Lincoln smiled as he took his seat in the special box above the stage. For a moment, it seemed like peace had finally arrived. But in the shadows, danger lurked. John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor and supporter of the Confederacy, had made his way into the theater. He believed Lincoln was a tyrant, a man who had destroyed the South. Booth had a plan to kill him. As the play continued, Booth slipped into the president's box, raised his pistol, and fired a single shot. The theater erupted into chaos. Mary screamed. The audience froze in shock. Booth jumped onto the stage, shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," a Latin phrase meaning "thus always to tyrants," and fled into the night. Lincoln, gravely wounded, was carried across the street to a small boarding house. Doctors worked desperately to save him, but the injury was too severe. Early the next morning, at 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln died. The nation was devastated. People wept openly in the streets. Newspapers printed black borders around their pages as a sign of mourning. Flags were lowered to half-staff. Across the North, cities and towns held memorial services to honor the fallen president. Even in the South, some people grieved his death, realizing that Lincoln had planned to help rebuild the nation with kindness and forgiveness. Lincoln's body was placed in a coffin and taken to the White House, where soldiers and government officials paid their respects. Soon after, a funeral train was organized to carry his body back to his hometown of Springfield, Illinois. The train would pass through many cities along the way, allowing Americans to say their final goodbyes to their leader. The funeral train became a moving symbol of the nation's grief. In city after city, thousands of people gathered along the tracks. They stood in silence, holding candles or waving small flags. Some knelt in prayer. Others wept openly, their faces full of sorrow. Many brought their children, wanting them to see the man who had done so much for their country. At each stop, Lincoln's coffin was taken off the train and placed in a public building for people to visit. Lines stretched for blocks as men, women, and children waited hours to pay their respects. Some people left flowers or notes beside the coffin. Others simply stood quietly, reflecting on all that Lincoln had done. Lincoln's journey home was long and emotional. It followed nearly the same route he had taken in 1861 when he traveled to Washington, D.C. to become president. Back then, he had been filled with hope and determination, ready to lead a divided nation. Now, he was returning as a symbol of sacrifice, a man who had given his life to preserve the Union and end slavery. In Springfield, Lincoln was buried at Oak Ridge Cemetery. The funeral was a solemn and heartfelt event, attended by family, friends, and government leaders. His grave was marked with a simple stone, but soon after, plans were made to build a grand memorial in his honor. The people of Springfield and the entire nation wanted to ensure that Lincoln's legacy would never be forgotten. Even as they mourned, Americans began to reflect on what Lincoln had achieved. He had led the country through its greatest crisis, holding the Union together when it seemed impossible. He had issued the Emancipation Proclamation, paving the way for the end of slavery. He had shown courage, kindness, and wisdom in the face of incredible challenges. Lincoln's death also raised questions about the future. He had planned to bring the North and South back together, with compassion and forgiveness. Now, without him, many wondered if the nation could heal. Some feared that anger and resentment would make the wounds of war even deeper. In the years that followed, Lincoln's dream of equality and justice faced many challenges. The Reconstruction era was a time of progress and setbacks as the country struggled to rebuild and address the rights of formerly enslaved people. But Lincoln's words and actions remained a guiding light. His speeches, like the Gettysburg Address and his second inaugural address, reminded Americans of their shared values and the importance of unity. Around the world, people admired Lincoln's legacy. He became a symbol of hope, democracy, and the fight for freedom. Leaders in other countries looked to his example as they worked to create fairer and freer societies. His story of a poor boy from a log cabin who became one of history's greatest leaders continued to inspire generations. Today, Lincoln's legacy lives on in many ways. His face is on the penny and the $5. His words are studied in schools, and his life is celebrated in books, movies, and museums. The Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., stands as a powerful tribute to his leadership and vision. Visitors from all over the world come to stand before the great statue of Lincoln, reflecting on his contributions to history. But perhaps the most important way Lincoln lives on is in the values he stood for: honesty, equality, and determination. He showed that one person can make a difference, even in the face of great challenges. He believed in the power of democracy and the strength of a united people, and he gave his life to ensure that the United States would survive and thrive as a nation of the people, by the people, for the people. The nation mourned deeply for Abraham Lincoln, but his dream lived on. His vision of a better, freer, and fairer America continued to guide the country, even in its darkest moments. And though he was gone, his spirit remained, reminding everyone that freedom, justice, and unity are always worth fighting for. Chapter 12. Lincoln's Legacy. Abraham Lincoln is remembered as one of the greatest leaders in history, Today, his name is spoken with respect and admiration all over the world. But why? What made Lincoln so special? His story, his humble beginnings, his leadership, and his courage continues to inspire people everywhere. He proved that one person can make a difference. Lincoln was born in a tiny log cabin in Kentucky. He grew up poor with no fancy clothes, no fine meals, and no big opportunities. But even as a boy, he had something more valuable: curiosity and determination. He worked hard, taught himself to read and write, and dreamed of a better life. His story began in poverty, but it didn't end there. When Lincoln entered politics, he showed the world what true leadership looks like. He didn't lie or cheat to win votes. He didn't try to make himself rich or powerful. Instead, he focused on helping others. He spoke simply and honestly, and people trusted him. They called him Honest Abe, and he lived up to that name every day. As president, Lincoln faced challenges that would break most people. The Civil War tore the country apart. The Union was at risk of falling apart, and slavery divided the nation even further. Yet Lincoln stayed strong. He believed in the power of unity. He believed in justice. And he believed in freedom for all. The Civil War was the greatest test of Lincoln's leadership. Many people doubted him, criticized him, or even hated him. But he never gave up. He worked day and night to save the Union. He made hard decisions that no one else wanted to make. And he reminded Americans why their country was worth fighting for. The Emancipation Proclamation was one of Lincoln's boldest acts. With a few powerful words, he declared that enslaved people in the Confederacy were free. It was a risky move, but Lincoln knew it was the right thing to do. He believed slavery was wrong, and he wanted to build a country where freedom and equality could thrive. Lincoln's speeches were just as powerful as his actions. The Gettysburg Address, though only 2 minutes long, is one of the most famous speeches in history. In it, Lincoln spoke of freedom, democracy, and the sacrifices made by those who fought for them. His words continue to inspire people today, reminding us that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. But Lincoln's legacy isn't just about the things he did. It's also about the kind of person he was. He was kind, humble, and fair. He treated everyone with respect, no matter who they were. He listened to others, even when he didn't agree with them. And he stayed true to his beliefs, even when it was hard. Lincoln once said, "I do the very best I know how, the very best I can, and I mean to keep on doing so until the end." This simple statement sums up his life. He wasn't perfect, he made mistakes, but he always tried his best, and he never stopped working for what he believed in. Lincoln's life ended too soon. When he was assassinated in 1865, the nation mourned deeply. People from all walks of life, rich and poor, soldiers and civilians, Northerners and Southerners, grieved the loss of their leader. But even in death, Lincoln's spirit lived on. His leadership helped end the Civil War and bring the country back together. His actions led to the abolition of slavery, ensuring that future generations would live in a freer and fairer nation. And his words gave people hope, reminding them that even in the darkest times, they could strive for a better future. Today, Lincoln's legacy can be seen everywhere. His face is on the penny and the $5 bill. Schools, streets, and towns are named after him. The Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. stands as a tribute to his leadership and vision. Visitors from all over the world come to the memorial to reflect on his life and achievements. But Lincoln's legacy is more than statues and speeches. It's the idea that one person, no matter how humble their beginnings, can make a difference. It's the belief that honesty, kindness, and determination can overcome even the greatest challenges. And it's the hope that freedom and equality will always triumph in the end. Lincoln's story inspires leaders, activists, and ordinary people to this day. His example shows us that true greatness doesn't come from wealth or power. It comes from courage, compassion, and a commitment to doing what is right. Around the world, Lincoln is a symbol of democracy and justice. Leaders in other countries look to his example when facing their own challenges. His speeches are studied in schools, his ideas are discussed in debates, and his life is celebrated as a model of what a leader should be. Abraham Lincoln once said, "The best way to predict your future is to create it." This quote captures the essence of his life. Lincoln didn't wait for opportunities to come to him. He worked for them. He didn't let failure stop him. He learned from it. And he didn't let hatred or division defeat him. He rose above it. His story teaches us that we all have the power to make a difference. We may not all become presidents, but we can all lead by example. We can all choose kindness over cruelty, courage over fear, and honesty over lies. We can all work to make the world a better place, just as Lincoln did. Today, when we think of Abraham Lincoln, we remember not just a president, but a hero, a man who fought for what he believed in, a man who gave everything for his country, a man whose dream of a united and just America continues to inspire us. Lincoln's journey, from a poor boy in a log cabin to a leader who changed the world, is proof that anything is possible. His legacy reminds us that even in the face of great challenges, we can rise above them. And it shows us that, with determination and heart, we can create a future full of hope, freedom, and equality. Abraham Lincoln may be gone, but his story lives on. His dream lives on, and his lessons guide us still. He taught us that unity is stronger than division, that justice is worth fighting for, and that one person can truly change the world.